He thought firing me would save his career. He didn't realize he was handing me the blueprints to his $7 million fraud. I was going to ruin him, and I was going to get paid to do it. This is the story of the quiet revenge that cost him everything. This is the story of how my boss, a man who loved the taste of betrayal and the smell of fear, decided my career was collateral damage in his personal ego trip. He fired me for a crime I didn't commit, leaving me homeless and broken. But he made a mistake. He failed to realize that when you take everything from a quiet person, you create a monster with nothing left to lose and a whole lot of time to plan. This is the story of how I went from being fired to fortune, and how I didn't just ruin his life. I used his own company's dirty laundry to fund my escape and build my empire. I remember the exact moment the life drained out of me. It wasn't the sound of the word fired. It was the sickening, smug smile on Marcus Sterling's face as he said it. Marcus was the managing director of Sterling & Thorne, a mid-size financial consulting firm, a perfect blend of glass, chrome, and calculated cruelty. He looked like an investment banker's caricature, expensive suit, silver hair meticulously slicked back, and eyes that perpetually assessed your utility. I had been there for 5 years, starting as a fresh-faced analyst and working my way up to senior consultant. I loved my job. Not the hours, they were brutal, but the challenge, the sheer, complex joy of untangling a client's financial knot. My life was simple. My tiny downtown apartment, my routine of black coffee and spreadsheets, and the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. I was loyal, maybe foolishly so. I saw Sterling & Thorne as my family, Marcus, despite his coldness, as my mentor. The problem started with the Meridian Project, a massive, high-stakes consultation for a tech giant going through a messy acquisition. Millions were on the line. Marcus had assigned me as the lead analyst, touting my unflappable attention to detail. The pressure was immense. I was living in the office, sleeping on a couch in the break room for 3 weeks straight. Then came the email. It landed in my inbox at 2 a.m., a Tuesday. A single cryptic line from the client contact. There seems to be a significant discrepancy in the asset valuation documentation. We need to pause the transfer immediately. My blood ran cold. Discrepancy in that context meant only one thing: liability. I spent the next 12 hours tracing the error. It wasn't in my reports. It wasn't in the firm's central database. I finally found it buried deep in a supplemental valuation document that had been passed to Marcus's private assistant, Pamela, for final review before submission. The number had been transposed, a single-digit mistake that swung the value by $15 million. It looked like an innocent typo, but in this world, an innocent typo is a 5-alarm fire. I quickly fixed it, sent the correction to the client, and reported the incident up the chain. Here is where my life took its sharp, agonizing turn. Marcus didn't see a minor, corrected error. He saw an opportunity. The next afternoon, he called me into his enormous corner office, the one with the panoramic view of the city. He didn't ask me to sit. "Mark," he began, his voice smooth and low, "the Meridian Project is off the rails." I immediately protested. "Marcus, I corrected the error. It was a transposition in the secondary document." He cut me off with a raised hand, a gesture of absolute finality. "Stop. I've reviewed everything. The source material for that final draft came directly from you. The buck stops with the lead consultant. It stops with you." My chest tightened. "That's not fair, Marcus. I did everything right. I found the mistake. I fixed the mistake. It was a systemic slip-up in the handover." The smile came then, that sickening, predatory curve of his lips. "It's not about fair, Mark. It's about perception. And right now, the perception is that Sterling & Thorne had a catastrophic failure on a marquee account. The client has asked for accountability, and I'm giving it to them." He pushed a severance package and an NDA across the polished mahogany desk. "You're fired, Mark. Effective immediately. Clean out your desk by 5. Security will escort you out." The world tilted. My brain short-circuited. 5 years! All my dedication, my late nights, my loyalty. Gone. Because he needed a scapegoat. Because he needed to save face with the client, and more importantly, with his partners. He needed to show them he was a decisive leader, even if it meant sacrificing his best asset, me. A white-hot wave of injustice washed over me, so intense it made me dizzy. I didn't argue, I didn't plead, I just stared at him. I saw not a mentor, but a coward, a smiling snake. As I walked out, Marcus called after me, "Mark, let this be a lesson. In this business, you always cover your own flank." I didn't turn around. I didn't need a lesson. I needed revenge. And the seed of a terrifying, exhilarating idea had just taken root in the ashes of my career. He thought he was giving me a lesson. He was actually giving me the motive, the time, and the complete unmonitored access I needed to take his entire kingdom down. And he had no idea I still had his office keys. The first few weeks were a blur of humiliation and despair. Being escorted out of the office felt like a walk of shame, the eyes of my former colleagues following me, pity mixed with the cold relief that it wasn't them. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. The silence of my small apartment, which used to be my sanctuary, became a torture chamber where the playback loop of Marcus's smug smile ran endlessly. I wasn't just unemployed. I was radioactive. In the small, tight-knit world of financial consulting, being fired for a multi-million-dollar error, even if you were innocent, was a death sentence. Every job application resulted in a polite but firm rejection. Marcus hadn't just fired me, he had tainted my future. I started having physical symptoms, tension headaches, a constant churning nausea. One night, I woke up in a sweat, my heart hammering, convinced I heard the faint, distant clicking of my office keyboard. I was spiraling. I was broke. My savings were pitiful, and with no income, I had to choose between paying rent and buying groceries. The landlord started leaving passive-aggressive notes. The feeling of being completely powerless was the worst agony. I remember one particularly low point. I was sitting on the floor of my empty kitchen, staring at a can of lukewarm beans, and I burst into tears. Not the dramatic sobbing kind, but a quiet, pathetic weeping that felt like a surrender. Marcus Sterling had taken my career, my stability, and my dignity. And he was sleeping soundly in his penthouse while I was rationing canned goods. In the darkness, a thought crystallized. If I can't live a good life, I will at least ensure he doesn't either. It was a corrosive thought, but it was also a shield. It gave me purpose. The despair didn't vanish, but it was now channeled into a cold, meticulous rage. I began to study him, not just Marcus the boss, but Marcus the man. I knew he was an arrogant workaholic, but I needed the details. What were his vulnerabilities? I started with the NDA. He made me sign it because he was terrified I'd talk about the Meridian fiasco. But the NDA was purely about the client business. It didn't mention the internal workings of Sterling and Thorne. This was my first crack in his armor. I remembered something critical. During my time on the Meridian project, I had been given administrative-level access to the firm's legacy accounting server. It was an older system, scheduled for retirement, but still used to house long-term client data and, critically, the firm's internal proprietary financial models and historical contracts. When I was fired, my user account was deactivated, but I'd neglected to turn in my physical system access key fob, a small silver USB-like device that bypassed the two-factor authentication on the legacy network. It was still in a drawer in my apartment.
I had completely forgotten about it. My heart pounded when I found it. It was like holding a key to his castle's back door, the key to the kingdom he had so casually banished me from. I realized I couldn't just tell the world he was a coward. I needed evidence, real, irrefutable dirt. I needed something that wouldn't just hurt his reputation, but would cripple the firm he used as his personal shield. I plugged the key fob into my ancient, slow laptop. My hands were shaking. I used the old backdoor administrator credentials I'd accidentally been given years ago for server maintenance. The system was slow, unsecured, and I was in. I started digging. I wasn't looking for minor policy violations. I was looking for the soul of the firm, the financial skeleton buried beneath the polished exterior. I learned the names of his partners, their personal interests, their financial structure. I learned about the expensive, high-risk, borderline unethical investments he was steering the firm toward. But then, I found something much, much bigger. Something that made my breath catch in my throat. It was a trail of small, recurring payments disguised as vendor consultation fees, leading out of the firm's main operating account. They weren't going to a vendor. They were going to a shell company in the Cayman Islands. A shell company with only one director, Marcus Sterling's sister-in-law. It wasn't a typo. It wasn't incompetence. It was fraud. This wasn't just a corporate crime. This was the lifeline I needed to rise from the ashes. I wasn't going to ruin him out of spite. I was going to ruin him to survive. I was going to leverage his crime into my fortune. I knew the risk of being caught was astronomical, but staring at the $7.4 million he had siphoned from the firm, I knew I had found the pressure point. The next phase wasn't about seeking justice. It was about stealing the map to his treasure and then walking away a free, wealthy man. The discovery of the fraud, the $7.4 million leak, didn't just bring purpose. It brought a cold, terrifying focus. My sleepless nights were no longer filled with despair, but with complex, three-dimensional chess. The nausea was replaced by the low, constant hum of adrenaline. Marcus was no longer just a figure of injustice. He was a target. My first thought was to go to the authorities, but that was too fast, too loud, and too messy. It would immediately lead back to the only person with the motive and the technical knowledge, me. I'd be trading unemployment for a jail cell. Marcus, with his expensive lawyers, would spin the narrative that I had fabricated the evidence out of spite. No, I needed surgical precision. I needed to leverage the information for maximum, untraceable gain. My plan was twofold. Expose the fraud internally. I couldn't go to the police, but I could go to the firm's partners. They were Marcus's equals, but they were also his rivals. They were driven by profit and fear of liability. Showing them that Marcus was compromising the firm's financial health and risking criminal charges would be a powerful weapon. Monetize the knowledge. I needed money to disappear, to start over, to truly win. The key was to acquire not just the proof of the fraud, but all of Sterling and Thorne's proprietary models, client lists, and internal strategy documents. The intellectual property of a firm like that was worth a fortune to a competitor. The meticulous plotting began. My old apartment became my operations center. I bought a burner laptop and a VPN. Every keystroke was calculated. I spent weeks systematically mapping the legacy server, identifying the critical data caches. I didn't steal the data all at once. I trickled it out, bit by bit, disguised as routine server backups, into a series of encrypted cloud drives. This was the first near miss. One night while transferring a massive archive of client contracts, the VPN momentarily flickered. An alert flashed on the server log before I could re-establish the connection. I held my breath, physically sweating. Did anyone notice? Was Marcus watching? I immediately deleted the access logs on the legacy system and shut down the key fob. For 3 agonizing days, I didn't touch it, convinced I had been detected. The silence was deafening. But Marcus, arrogant and secure in his belief that I was broken and gone, never bothered to check the archaic system I was exploiting. I used the time to create my pitch. I compiled all the truly incriminating evidence of Marcus's shell company payments into one pristine, irrefutable folder. Bank statements, email trails, and corporate registration documents. This was the nuclear option. Then came the second terrifying step, finding a buyer for the IP. I couldn't just email a competing firm. It had to be done through a trusted third-party intermediary. I contacted my former university mentor, a highly respected consultant who had often expressed his disdain for Marcus's ethics. I didn't tell him the truth. I told him I had compiled a superior set of financial forecasting models during my time at S&T, and I was looking to sell them before Marcus could legally block me. My mentor, seeing only a way to help an old student and gain valuable assets, put me in touch with a quiet, powerful private equity firm known for poaching talent and IP. The meeting was a covert affair in a dark, anonymous hotel conference room. I was shaking the entire time, trying to project competence. I presented the data, the proprietary models, the high-value client lists. They were blown away. The firm offered me a 6-figure consulting fee plus a percentage of future revenue generated from the models. My heart was thumping so hard it thought they could hear it. I signed the contract under a pseudonym and received the first wire transfer that night. It was the first time in months I felt the solid ground beneath my feet. The money was my ticket, but it wasn't the revenge. The revenge had to be public, humiliating, and irreversible. It had to come from the inside. With the money secured, I was ready for the final step, the anonymous delivery of the nuclear option to the firm's other partners. I drafted a simple 1-page letter signed "A Former Colleague," explaining that Marcus had been siphoning millions from the firm under their noses and had scapegoated an innocent employee, me, to cover his tracks on the Meridian project. I sealed the letter and the flash drive containing the evidence in a manila envelope. The weight of the envelope in my hand was immense. It was the lever that would topple Marcus Sterling's empire. I walked to the firm's headquarters for the first time in months. The execution had to be perfect. I wasn't just dropping off a letter. I was planting the bomb that would end Marcus Sterling's career, and I was going to be there to watch it explode. The day I returned to Sterling and Thorne was cold and drizzly. I parked blocks away and wore a nondescript baseball cap and a bulky coat, standard city camouflage. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, but my mind was laser-focused. This wasn't about anger anymore. It was about the perfect execution of a 2-month-long strategy. I timed it perfectly, 7:45 a.m., just as the early bird partners and